training. What if I put my prices up? Or is the real question, what if I don't? My name's Andy Crook, and my mission is to help garage owners become more successful in business. So tonight, we're going to look at the 3 reasons why you should put your prices up, the real reason why you haven't, and the result of not putting your prices up. And as a little bit of a bonus, we'll look at the average labour rate for independent garages in the UK. What is the real reason that you haven't put your prices up? Well, the real reason is fear. And we'll look at that in a second. So what happens if you do put your prices up? Well, the first thing you'll notice is that you'll have more income, which sounds obvious, but it's true. And that income could allow you to invest in the business to provide a better service. And if you have a better service, you can win and keep better customers. But that principle relies on the principle of fair exchange. So if we put our prices up, we have more income. With that income, we can invest more in the business, which means we can provide a better service, which means we can win and keep better customers. So it's win-win-win in effect. But it does rely on the principle of fair exchange. What is fair exchange? Well, it means that both parties have to feel like the transaction is equal, that you're getting what you want out of the transaction and the customer's getting what they want out of the transaction. So what happens if it isn't a fair exchange on one side or the other? Then ultimately the relationship will come to an end because one party will be dissatisfied with what they're getting from the arrangement, which is why you can't just keep putting up your prices and not improving any of the services. Because if you do that, you will start to lose customers because they will have felt ripped off or that you're too expensive for the value that you provide. So that is the negative, if you like, of putting your prices up. But that only applies if you don't reinvest in your business. Now, the other thing about putting your prices up, and that's linked to the principle of fair exchange, is that the higher your price, the more you want to do a better job, or the more able you are to do a better job, because you're able to, as I've said, invest more in your business because you have a surplus of cash to invest in the business instead of getting to the end of the month, year, quarter, and just about paying your bills. So they're the 3 reasons why you should put your price up. Number 1, more income, therefore more profit. Number 2, it allows you to invest in your business. Number 3, it allows you to provide a better service, which ultimately results in you winning and keeping better customers. So that's why you need to put your prices up. So the real reason why you haven't is fear. And the fear of the unknown, of not knowing what happens when you do put your prices up. Now, everybody, when I have this conversation with them, has a certain amount of pushback, a certain amount of reluctance to do it until they've done it and they realize, oh, you know what? That wasn't so bad. That wasn't so bad. But what happens if you don't? What happens if you listen to this video and go, you know what, and you're wrong, my customers won't pay more? Well, ultimately, what you'll be doing is working for less because inflation is real and inflation continues and has done over the last 20 years. The average inflation over the last 20 years was 2.62%, which means that if you haven't put your prices up year on year by around about 3%, you're working for less because of something called net present value. Now, I'll do a little bit more training in depth on this at another date. But have you noticed that prices around you are going up for all your other commodities, especially utilities, gas and electric? Well, is it not right and fair that you pass on your increasing costs to your customers to cover your overheads? Everybody else is doing it. Why don't garages? Now, that in essence is the reason why you should keep increasing your prices year on year, is to keep up with inflation. Otherwise, the work you're doing now, this year, if you did exactly the same last year, this year you're doing it for less. In effect, although the money you're changing hands is the same, something called net present value means that the money in your cash today will be worth less tomorrow. And if you extract that over longer periods of time, you start to work out that the the work you're doing now, you're doing it at effectively a lesser labour rate than you were before, which is not a great idea in business. So the the other thing I want to talk about is the average labour rate for independent garages in the UK. Now, the Independent Garage Association, the IGA, did a survey and they published their findings a little while ago. And these figures are for 2020. So the figures I'm about to give you are for 2020. And the average labour rate for an independent garage across the whole of the UK was £47.47 plus VAT. So a little under 50 quid in 2020. Now, that report, if you can type it in the internet, you'll find it. And you'll see that what they referred to in there is also, they spoke about inflation, how garages haven't been putting their prices up. And that 47.47 has fallen behind inflation over the period of their study, which means they're also highlighting this fact that the garages are now doing work for less effectively because of inflation. Now, the reason I've picked this topic at the beginning of 2022 is because we tend to put our prices up at the beginning of the year. And if we haven't, then I suggest we start thinking about it. Right now, inflation, or the consumer price index, is running. It's a bit complicated to go into the difference between inflation. There's two types of inflation, basically, the retail price index and the consumer price index. But basically, it's running at around about 5%. Now, the last time it was anything like this high was 1991, where it rose to the highest in the last 20 years, which was 8%. And to give you an idea, a flavour of how much inflation fluctuates, then in, I think it was 2015, it was minus 0.1%. So the cost of things was actually cheaper than the year previous. But generally, the trend over a period of time is that inflation goes up, not down. So the question that you've got to ask yourself around about your hourly rate, and the average in the UK in 2020 being 47.47 plus VAT, is where is your labour rate in accordance with that, the average garage? Now, do you consider yourself average? Do you consider yourself above average? Is your labour rate in line with that? Now, the only other sort of yardstick we have for labour rate, if we're comparing our labour rate with national averages, is the MOT rate. So the cost of doing an MOT and the time that takes, if you consider that's being set by the government, and the price of the MOT hasn't gone up in quite a long time, which means that using that as a yardstick, you probably have to look at when that labour rate, when the MOT fee was fixed, and the amount of inflation since then, as a realistic way of checking whether or not your current labour rate sits where it should be. Now, the unusual thing for garages when all of this is happening is if the price of the parts you buy has increased, you don't generally have a fixed price for those parts. So you don't have a price for an EGR valve. Basically, what happens, it comes into your garage at a price, you add up your margin, and then you sell it at the price, your margin based on the cost price. The selling price is based on the cost price, or for some garages they follow some sort of recommended retail price, which is a chat for another day as well. So that inflation, or the increase in that material, or the cost of that part for us, doesn't feel like we're putting our prices up. But in effect, if the cost price was higher because of inflation or because of changes in the market, then the selling price will be higher. So we are in effect putting our prices up because we're putting our parts prices up. It's maybe not our labour prices that we've put up for some time. So, if you're thinking about, wow, I couldn't do it to my customers, well, you probably already are. So why not do that little bit more and put up your labour rate? Because if your fixed costs are increasing, your labour rate must increase to cover those fixed costs. And if inflation means that a penny in your pocket now is worth less than a penny in your pocket tomorrow, then you need to somehow account for that in your labour rate by changing it at a time that suits you. So you might not put it up every year, but maybe every second year, or maybe every third year. But if you leave it too long, you start losing money. And we'll, like I said, we'll do some training on that, on something called net present value at a future date. So to sum up, what happens if you put your prices up? Well, it's kind of all good news because the net result, if you do put your prices up and you behave ethically, in as much as you invest the increase in profits back into the business to offer a better service, which means your fair exchange values mean that you keep and win better customers, yeah, it's good news for the business. Whereas most people think it's a negative, it's actually often a positive. If you don't, you're working for less. And the real reason why people are afraid of putting it up, or putting the real reason why people don't put their prices up is because they're afraid to do so. But here's a question I want to ask just to end on: is when was the last time a customer asked you what your labour rate was? How often does that happen? If you think about that, what they want to know when they book their car in, or they're asking for a quote, if they're shopping around, all they want to know is how long and how much. So, how long is it before you can do it and when it'll be finished, basically, and how much is it going to cost me? They're not really worried about the difference between the cost of the parts, the sundries, the labour. They just want to know what they will be paying when they come to pick it up, and when they can drop it off, and when they can collect it. So it's a big thing for us as garage owners, the labour rate. It's a big thing. It's sort of, we make a big thing of it ourselves, but actually it's not that important to the customers. All they want to know is what will the final bill be. How that bill is made up is not that important to them. That's all they want to know. So I think we need to get over ourselves a bit and decide, you know what, let's get in line with the rest of the country, and make sure we're covering our costs by putting our prices up to cover our fixed costs, because we're not doing it to exploit customers. We're doing it so that the business remains healthy, that it remains profitable, and therefore it continues trading, offering that great, fabulous service that independent garages provide to our customers. Thanks for listening, and there'll be another topic next week. I hope you enjoyed this session. Thank you.